So right now we're in the first 3 weeks of the year, and wanted to sharing over at Simply Wholehearted about 3 weeks to a new year. And so we're talking about fasting. We're talking about one word, choosing the one word for the year, and we're also talking about goal setting for 2018. So whenever I first was thinking about this concept of fasting, I thought about the scripture in Isaiah 58, just getting God's perspective on fasting. And so I'm not going to read it, but I just give you a quick little synopsis. Basically, the people were crying out and saying, God, we've done all these things, we've fasted, but then God says, it's the fast that I choose it's to loose the bonds and straps of wickedness, anything that binds, to set the oppressed free, to feed the hungry, to bring the homeless in, to clothe those who need it. And so it's just funny to me that that was the first verse that popped in my mind. But Ashley had kind of told us about the why behind fasting. But because in that verse, it was them saying, but God, we did all these things and you didn't do what we wanted you to do. And so I just think of really the why behind fasting is we don't fast to make God or to make other people do things. We don't fast to manipulate God. We fast to know God. We fast to know his heart and to know his will. So God is definitely moved by us. Okay, so don't get me wrong. Don't mishear me when I say that fasting isn't to manipulate God, because it's really not, because God is moved by us. He is moved because he loves us. It's not by anything that we do, though. It's not by our behavior or by our actions. God is moved because he loves us. We are moved by fasting. So Annalise had shared that fasting aligns us with Jesus, because it's not him that needs to move, it's me. And so a couple of different instances in the Bible, because I want to tell you, I want to emphasize the importance of knowing that God absolutely is moved by his people. He is absolutely moved by us. So there's a couple of different examples. Mark 1:41 says that Jesus was moved with compassion to heal the leper. Mark 6:34 and Matthew 14:14. It's the story, two different accounts of the same story of the feeding of the 5,000. And it said that Jesus saw a great crowd and was moved with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He loved them, was moved with compassion because he didn't want them to be without a shepherd, because he loved them. Matthew 9:36 is kind of the same thought, as that he had compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. But my very favorite one, and I'm actually going to read this verse because I love it so much. And I'm going to start in verse 32 of chapter 11 in John. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. It later goes on to say that Jesus wept. You see, God is moved with compassion. Jesus knew what was coming next. He knew that he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But he was moved with compassion because he saw Mary was devastated. He saw that she was hurting, that he was so moved that he wept on her behalf. God is moved by us, but not by our performance, not by our behavior. He's moved on our behalf because he loves us. Because therefore it's still about God. It's still about God's goodness, not about ours. So we are moved by fasting. God is moved by his love for each of us. So I've done a couple of different fasts. One of them was so cool. It was an all-day fast. I fasted everything. I literally was out in the woods with nothing but like my Bible and some supplies, like a notebook, and it was at a retreat that I was on, and we literally spent the entire day just out in the woods alone with God. And I just had those things. I had water and Gatorade, but I didn't have my phone. I didn't have anything. It was fantastic. It was one of the most amazing days of my life. I'm not even gonna lie. And there was no food involved, so that's amazing because I love food. Another time was when I was fasting for a situation, like a hard situation. And so it was one of those times where literally, like, it was one of the hardest situations I'd walked through. And I even called, kind of like what Ashley had shared with us about Esther, she called the people along to fast with her. Well, I had asked my husband to fast with me. Just a couple days going into this, it was a hard conversation I was going to have to walk into, a hard situation. And really, I wasn't fasting at that point because I wanted God to do something. Trust me, I wanted God to do something, but it wasn't I wasn't fasting to try to manipulate God. I was fasting because I wanted to know God's heart. I wanted to stay aligned because it was a big deal to me. And so I did not want to miss God. I love that's what Jody had told us about. We it's not about what we're missing, but it's because we so often miss God. Here's the thing. I wasn't trying to change God in the situation. I was trying to stay so in tune with God that I could handle it. Not because I wanted to be so strong and handle it, but because, see, God was giving me the strength through fasting, through seeking Him, that I could handle it. There was another situation I'd had, I'd done some fasting for some health stuff I'd had in the past. Same situation. The outcome wasn't what I'd hoped it would be. In that given situation, in the health situation, I never got this full, miraculous healing that I had hoped for and prayed for and fasted for and cried out to God for. I never really had that. But the thing was, I had God, and I knew Him. And the fasting, again, it wasn't to manipulate God, it was to know God. And in any of these situations that I've talked about, I knew God more through them. And even if there were ones that didn't work out the way that I'd hoped, I knew Him more through them. And so it wasn't to try to force God to do something, it was to force myself to see things like God sees them. And that so often is what happens when we're fasting. It forces us to trust Him, to be sensitive to Him, so that we can walk in His ways. And so again, I'm going to say it again only because if you get nothing else, I want you to hear this, that we don't fast to manipulate God, we fast to know God. Because ultimately, isn't everything about knowing God? Isn't that what all of this is about? And about knowing His heart and seeing His perspective and to trust Him? So if you ever find yourself disappointed in your fast or in the outcome of your fast, know this, that you're not the first person to ever feel that way. Remember in Isaiah 58, they were crying out to God, God, why aren't you listening to us? And so often that happens. And I know that because I am so, that is something that I've totally been in that same situation, been disappointed. Like, this didn't work out the way I'd hoped. It didn't work out the way that I planned. And God, I cried out to you. I did exactly what I should have done. I did A, B, and C. And why didn't you? Listen, you're not alone if you feel that way. I just want to challenge you. Ask Him. Ask Him maybe, God, what is your perspective? What are your thoughts on this? So tonight I was asking my husband, we were sitting at dinner, and I was asking my husband to maybe for some input because I knew I was going to do this. And my son piped up, my oldest, and he said, I was asking him what he thought about fasting. And my son was like, well, fasting is about focusing on God and not on all those other things. And I was like, dude, why don't you do the video for me? And it would have been much shorter too. But it's about focusing on God and not all those other things. So it's not like we're giving up because we're trying to perform something. We give things up because we want to focus and align with Him. We want to see His perspective. We want to get His heart, whether it's for a situation, whether it's for the whole year, because right now we're 3 weeks to a new year, right? So we want to focus on Him for what's ahead. So anyway, thanks so much for hanging with us. Stay with us for the next couple of weeks, because next week we're going to be talking about, I think I have this order right. I think next week we're talking about our one word and how finding that one word for the year. And then I think the third week we're talking about goal setting and what it looks like to set goals for the year. We are so happy to have you guys. If you aren't following yet, go to Simply Wholehearted. Just go to Facebook, type in Simply Wholehearted, and just like the page. So I know so many people are taking this time to do this for fasting and for just seeking the Lord in these first few weeks. And so we invite you. Love you, friends, so much, and thanks for checking this out.